All right, Adam, thank you for joining me today.
Hi,
Um,
Corey. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
yeah, I'm excited to talk to you because because you've read my book and you wrote a review on it, and I think that's like the coolest thing because my experience is like I was a drug addict for 10 plus years, and I never ever in my life imagined I could put pen to paper so much. I mean, to write a book, but even just like in my own journal, really, I never really did that. So, part of my, I think, unique story here is that yes, I had this plant medicine experience, and then 2 years, fast forward 2 years, and I've written this book about my experience. So I'm curious, like, how, your thoughts on that, because like. I don't know. I know for like the years that I was struggling, I always had this like hope that like something would work out for me, but it was diminished by the fact that I couldn't even go a day, I couldn't even go a moment without thinking about using heroin. So I'm curious, like what your take on reading my book and then like everything is. So
So, I would start by saying we live in strange and wild times. I am Gen X, and so I grew up with the propaganda of the war on drugs, onslaught in the 80s and into the 90s and whatnot. So, first of all, the reason I say that is because I think it's pretty, I don't know what the right word is, maybe jarring, shocking, surprising, something like this, that people with substance use disorder are now using other quote unquote drugs to heal and to quit their dependence and
yes,
recover from substance use disorder. So I think that that's kind of a big overarching theme, and I'm happy for it. It's obviously I think we're in a huge, huge era of transition and change, and I think we don't even know half of what's coming around the corner over the next decade or two. And so I think this is an indication of the change that's happening. And I don't think that the psychedelics are an end all be all. And yet, I think they're a step in the right direction. We're starting to make some moves outside of our normal Western medical system and establishment to address problems that we've had for decades.
yeah,
Decades ago when I was in college, I had close friends that were addicts. I knew some people that died, and this is a growing problem. I mean, not just a growing problem. It's there's no opioid crisis in the United States that's been going on now for at least a decade, if not 2 decades. So it's about time that some new solutions have arrived, and so I think it's a step in the right direction.
yeah. Thanks for saying that. It brings up three different things on my mind. One is, yeah, I agree. I think it's almost in a sense that the future or like life is kind of speeding up in the sense of like, yeah, I was a drug addict for 10 years. What in the world is another drug gonna give me that's gonna get me away from my drugs? Well, in the moment when I was using drugs, I didn't think it would. That's why I was so averse to. I was like, well, there's two options. Either it's going to work miraculously well, and I'm going to have to take accountability and responsibility for my life, and I don't want that. That's why I'm using drugs in the first place. Or it's not going to work, and what's the point of it? And then, so that was one point I wanted to make. The other point is it's kind of ironic because the pharmaceutical companies that provide methadone do the same thing. They give you another substance and say this is going to be the solution, when in fact, for me, speaking from my experience, it wasn't the solution. It actually just pushed me further into addiction. And then the third thing I wanted to bring up, and maybe we can land here, is you said you don't think, we've talked about this, how plant medicine experiences aren't usually like a magic bullet. They can be transformative, and they can be, they can be a driver for change. But I'm curious because you mentioned that you don't think they're a one cure all, or you didn't mention that, but that's what we talked about.
You
What,
know, you know,
yeah, what do you think could be if there were anything, or do you think,
well, uh, yeah, that's complicated. Everyone's favorite relationship status.
I think
And
I think every single person might have a different like answer to that, and I respect you a lot from the conversations we've had. I'm curious, like I genuinely think that you may have some very intellectual insight into that.
yeah, I think there's a lot of different potential solutions and answers, but I'm just gonna dive into something we've talked about before is that the reason I say psychedelics aren't an end all be all is because, in my opinion, they are a reactive solution to a problem. And at the rate that we have, at the rate the opioid crisis is growing, yeah, I don't think there's ever going to be enough psychedelic therapists or retreat centers or whatever to heal all of the people suffering from substance
Well,
use disorder. Uh,
for sure.
and so I think that the key is to punch up. And this is something I feel from my
Can you explain
experiences.
can you explain punch up? Because you brought that to my attention. Like you coined, or for me you coined it because I've never heard it before. And then you said that's kind of what I had done. I'm very curious, like what does it mean in your mind?
Yeah, yeah. So, this phrase is used a lot in politics, not to punch, sideways or laterally or down. Look at the drivers, what's provoking in this case the opioid crisis. So I don't think psychedelics is going to end it because if it keeps the opioid crisis keeps growing, it's going to be like a dog chasing its tail.
Right.
And so this is one of the things in my experience that I feel the psychedelic field or space is a little bit siloed because it doesn't punch up. It doesn't look up, like the movie recently. And what I'm talking about is, we live in a something between very sick and or toxic society and culture. And I think since 5, 6 years ago, the start of the pandemic and COVID, now a lot of people are waking up and realizing this, that we live in a culture and society that's not healthy, not even close to healthy. And I think when you start looking at some of the drivers and factors behind the opioid crisis, you realize this is a much, much bigger problem that has to be solved in a proactive manner. We have to change the systems that we live in. We have to change, our culture, our society, because one of the things that I mentioned in conjunction with this are deaths of despair. Deaths of despair are skyrocketing in the United States, and those are deaths from alcoholism, overdoses, suicides, and other things. And a lot of the research about deaths of despair show that people have lost hope. They have no hope for the future. They don't have good paying jobs. They don't have healthy communities. And as soon as those things collapse, then drugs and opioids move in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for saying all that because you're like I said, I value your perspective a lot. This process of meeting you and us meeting virtually for the past couple months now, and then you writing the review of the book. It's been eye-opening for me too. Like hearing your perspective is like I wonder because I try to have like a solution base to like at least for my own life. Like I can't speak for other people still using, right? I mean, I'd like to learn more, but for me, it's like, well, what could I have done to like stop using? And there really wasn't anything other than well, it's not just one thing. That's the point. It's not just psychedelic or plant medicine. It's not just community. It's not just, peer support was huge for me. It's not just my family. It's all of those wrapped in one, or not wrapped in one, but um operating on their own, kind of like intricately having this experience with me. It's like, okay, there's multi factors of how I was able to, and then so then ultimately what I say is a connection to self. And I just saw this thing on LinkedIn, this someone locally, a doctor, well, not a medical doctor, but he wrote that the solution, Johan Hari coined the solution to addiction is connection, and he took it a step further and said it's not connection, it's freedom. And I'm like, yeah, okay, it is freedom, but like, how does one get freedom? So for me, it was connection. It is connection. I saw someone else comment, connection isn't the solution, connection is the drug. And I'm like, well, that's solely that's nearsighted because it's sure you can have a connection to the drug, but that's not really I think what is being portrayed. For me, it was like connection to myself, not first and foremost. I didn't have a connection to who I was when I was on the methadone and the opiates because I had never met myself sober. I never had a conversation like a internal dialogue where I was being completely honest. But then like community, my brother, Katie, just like talking to people with like you, like literally just having conversations in like, um, I guess networking or having like a network of people is huge and then so yeah, connection to self, connection to community, I think connection to like purpose, like those are three, I think, major pillars that I think are very helpful. But yeah, it's like death, the despair. It's like when someone's in such despair, when I was in despair, none of those even made sense to me. Like I didn't even consider like, oh, connection to myself or connection to anybody else. It was the reason I was using was to not connect to those things on purpose. So in a sense, the guy was right. The connection is the drug. It's replacing the connection. I don't think it's a holistic connection.
Yeah. It's a false connection. I think it's yeah,
Artificial
yeah.
at artificial at the very least, right?
Yeah, that's the best way to look at it. Because another thing that comes to mind, Rory, with what you're saying to piggyback off that is that this huge change that we're going through, not only in the United States but in most of the West. Uh, and what I'm about to say, I think, is especially true of the United States. We've become hyper individualized. Most people in the United States are so atomized from their own families, their neighbors, their communities. And we've heard this phrase or word community, build community for at least 10 years now. People have seen this coming down the pike for a long, long time. And
Right.
now I think people are realizing why it's so important and why we need that. And, as you know, I live in Mexico, and this is so a lot of the problems that we're experiencing in the United States just either don't exist in Mexico or on a much, much uh, smaller basis or
So
lower
is
intensity.
there
For
more?
example, like there's not many drug addicts in Mexico, or not nearly as many as in the United States. There are problems, especially in Tijuana, because it's close to the border and a lot of the drugs go through Tijuana. But one of the things about Mexico, and this is true of most Latin American countries, is that they have very, very strong community, and they live in multi-generational households. So there's not this opportunity to kind of lose hope or slip into depression or, lose your way in life where drugs become a temptation.
Well, it's interesting because uh yeah, it feels like in America or United States, there's like a lack of community where
Absolutely.
the community is already inherent within those in other most societies where like for me, for example, I know my neighbor, like I know the name of my neighbor, but I don't know my neighbor. Like I don't know them. I mean, I know them as much as they're my neighbor, which you know, my brother and I, my brother was like, I wish we like knew our neighbors and wanted to like spend time with our neighbors. And it's like, okay, maybe not, but like the fact that I don't even I don't feel comfortable like just going up and striking a conversation. And I'm not suggesting it needs to be one way or another, but for me personally, it'd be like, I wish I knew them enough where I was, and I think, and I'm speaking for myself. I think other people, they have very neighborly communities. I actually heard about one community, one neighborhood or one street in New York. I was talking to this person and they're like every Wednesday or something, they all get together and they do this like street kind of gathering. And I'm like,
Oh, that's cool.
that's cool. It's like that's not something I've ever, I mean, when I was a kid, there was other kids in the neighborhood. That was the closest I could get to that. But as an adult, it's completely cut off from that community connection for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because this is something I bring up frequently when talking about the need for community in the United States. We used to have it, especially pre-World War II, and I think for a decade or two coming out of World War II. I always bring up being able to get on the internet and find black and white pictures of New York City in the 40s or 50s, and everybody's sitting on the front stoop of their brownstones, and the grandmas and moms are talking. other, the parents and the kids are out playing stickball on the street. It
Yeah.
used to be like that in the United States, and we need to bring that back. We've lost that, and I think that in a way, at least to some extent, for some people, that's the allure, the draw, the temptation of drugs, is because it gives you that feeling of connection with
Well,
people. You're numbing out your own soul and your own spirit, but you're replacing it with this feeling of false connection with other people, and you're journeying through something that's destroying everything.
and I love that. I love that perspective because it's honest and it's real. And that's what you I think provide to the conversations I've had, at least with you. Like you bring this rawness about it. So I just want to say it's interesting that you said that like pre-World War II or even a decade after there was more community. I recently, well, this wasn't recent, it was like over a year ago. I went down a neighbor, but at the end of the street of the house that I grew up in needed their driveway shoveled. So I went over and I shoveled it a couple times that winter. And a couple of times she was like, back when I was like a teenager, uh, everybody on the street knew each other, and like I think it was like every Friday or something, the entire street would get together and do like a barn dance. Is what she said, and I was like, that's so interesting to me. Like, I want to speak to the juxtaposition from where I'm at. It's like I was so disconnected at that point. Like nowadays, I'd be like, yeah, I'd love to do something. I was so disconnected. Like that sounds like kind of scary to like put like a vulnerability aspect, just like to put myself
Yeah.
out there and be there. Like I have to be there every Friday. Like what do there is this jostling of like I want connection, but I also don't know if I want to commit to connect. Like even when I make plans with friends or like even my brother like a week in advance, the day comes and I'm like, oh god, I have to go do something. The truth is, every time I go do the thing, I always feel much better afterward. So that's part of the connection. But yeah, I think like our society is like for me, growing up where I did, which was community based, but from when I was a kid until now, a lot has changed. I will say like COVID, a lot of people, there's a lot of like despair that came from COVID. For me personally, it helped me because that was right before COVID. I had my first plant medicine experience, the ayahuasca, and then I had the entire year where I didn't have to go out of the house and I could just work on myself, which isn't necessarily a good thing. I think there was a multiplicity of factors, like especially that happened. But yeah, I think like since COVID, it's like okay, community. I don't know. I just wanted to bring up that example of her being like, yeah, we all knew each other, and it was, the way she was speaking about it, it was almost as if she had like this uh this remembrance of like what it was like and how it's different. And I felt kind of sad. I was like, oh, because she's getting older. She's like in her late 90s, and I'm like, I didn't know her other than her being my neighbor. Like I really don't know her, but her talking about it brought up this feeling of like, oh, that of inspiration and awe. Like, oh, that would be cool to have something like that. So
Well, I think it's going to come back for sure, probably sooner than later. Most of these tumultuous, dramatic changes in countries, cultures, and societies, I think for the most part, they're cyclical. Things come and go. It's like the tides coming in and out. And with these uncertain, chaotic times that we're going through, we're realizing the need for community and to bring that back. And to your point, I think we're realizing now more day by day how much COVID and the pandemic messed us up. And what I mean by that is the the mental health repercussions of lockdowns and quarantines and people being stuck in their homes and houses and apartments for extended periods of time without connecting to other human beings. I've seen some videos recently on YouTube of people kind of talking about this that you know nothing's been the same since 2020, and also people talking about going to I don't know, a fast food restaurant, going through a drive-through, just interacting with people at stores or whatever, and saying, hi, how you doing? Think, whatever, just, making a little small talk. And the cashier or the people working the register or whatever at the drive through, they don't say anything. They're
well,
just totally mute and they're zombies. And I think, yeah, this is part of the fallout of the pandemic. And not only that, but also just being screen dependent constantly. Now we're coming close to a generation of people rely more on screens for socializing than other human beings. So, it does look uh, particularly dark and ominous, and it's easy to spiral into doom and gloom. And at the same time, like I said, these things are cyclical. And as I often mention, I have some spiritual wisdom that I can sum up in 3 words, which is shit grows flowers. So otherwise, we wouldn't put chicken shit and bat shit in gardens. So I think that's kind of what's happening now.
Okay.
Things have to kind of
Interesting.
crash out for things to soar again, kind of like the phoenix rising from the ashes. So I think the coming years are going to be tough with what we're going through, but eventually they're going to turn around and get better. And
Yeah.
eventually people will turn away more from screens because there's just going to be a natural human inclination to connect with other people. And I think with the possibility of more serious problems coming up in the near future, that we're going to have to rely on our neighbors, know each other, and help each other, and pull together. So yeah, I think that there is a light at the end
I,
of the tunnel.
I like that you brought up the idea, and I don't know how much time we have left. I have the limited Zoom, so it might just cut out. So I wanted to pause it one more question before it potentially does, because I think you might have a very great perspective on it. So you just brought up the fact that like when you're at like a retail or a services, the people that used to be like very helpful, it's almost like they're purpose. Like this is from my experience because I've experienced this. There, it's almost like they're purposely going against being helpful to like make a point almost. Like that's my personal experience. So my question is, all right, so capitalism's a thing, right? We have to make money, right? Is there a bridge? And I don't know if there is because like therapists, for example, they get like a clinical degree and then they get paid to spend time with their community aspect is getting paid. Well, what about someone like me with lived experience, or someone like you with a wealth of knowledge? Just everybody has unique things to offer. How do we bridge? And obviously, there might not be an easy answer, else we already would be doing it. But how does like is there going to be because spending time with people, there's an energy exchange, but there's not always it doesn't always translate to money because that would be weird. It's not like, oh, come out, hang out with me. I'm going to spend money for you to hang out. There's so I'm just like thinking like are we at an age, right? And I guess we don't know yet because it hasn't maybe happened. It happens for some people, but like, are we at an age where like there has to be some shift of like monetary, I don't know, energy, like what, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or if I even articulated that well enough. And if I probably didn't, but I'm just
No, I
curious.
know what you're getting at. I can take a stab or two at that. Yeah, I mean that's a theme that I see coming up in some of the videos that I've been watching recently about just this gigantic sea change in the United States going on right now, and there's increasingly more talk of people. Well, what's happening in this time in this era, some people call the Great Awakening. I call it the Great Revealing, and it seems that COVID kind of maybe if it didn't start it, it certainly accelerated it. And so people are waking up to the fact that we live in the matrix. We're all running in this hamster wheel, and we're basically all just chasing money. And the American dream is dying, if not already dead. And so people are like, what's the point of doing all this? And when people are terribly unhappy with their jobs, most people have no meaning or purpose in their jobs, as David Graeber, who was one of the founders of Occupy Wall Street, said. He wrote a book about it. Most people work bullshit jobs, and they're just working for the paycheck. And now the paycheck isn't even that good with the inflation in the United States. So I think there will be an increased awareness towards moving away from doing everything to chase a dollar. And again, that's another interesting comparison, or maybe contrast is a better word, with Latin American countries. One of the things I love about living in a Latin American country, and I also used to live in Spain, is that the center of every town, city, village is usually a Catholic church. But what's right in front of the church always is a plaza. And everybody goes and hangs out in the plaza and just spends time sitting around, loitering, talking with people in the plaza, walking their dogs. The kids are playing, parents are pushing strollers. Maybe you buy a coffee or a snack or something to eat. And here in my neighborhood in Mexico, I go to my plaza every night and have coffee with my friends. And those types of, well, I guess those are called what, third places or third spaces, are few and far between in the United States because everywhere you go in the United States, you have to spend money. And
Yeah.
that takes away from the human connection. And we need more of that. I mean, we're in desperate need of that. We just don't spend our time outside in public spaces a lot, just talking with other people in the United States, because we're usually always in our cars. And then we get out of our car, going to the store, or going to the
Yeah,
house, or going to school,
there
and then
has
leave here, get right back in the car, go somewhere else. So it's a mess.
Yeah, there has it feels this is one thing I just discovered in the past few weeks and I've been talking about with people is, when I was a kid, I would meet up with my friends. We didn't have any objective. We would just have good time, just
Yeah.
being together. As an adult, it's like even if my brother's like, "Hey, come hang out." I'm like, "Okay, but what are we doing?" And if we're not doing anything, I feel like not only am I wasting time, I just feel shameful just being here. It's weird. It's a weird experience that I never thought I was going to experience when I was a kid because I never had experienced it. And the adults I saw back then, I was like, they're all, living life and happy, but I didn't have their perspective. Also, I think times are changing. So yeah, yeah, there's something to that for sure. Like,
And on another deeper level, I just ran across this recently is maybe one of the other impactful types of propaganda that has been slamming us for decades is the need to always be productive. In the United States, I mean, there may not be any other country in the world that demands more of us. But that's why we're in a live to work culture. We've been propagandized to believe that we constantly have to be productive, working, going, moving, doing. And because of this mindset, we've embraced a world where leisure is the enemy. And leisure is not accepted, embraced, considered healthy or needed to nurture your mind, body, soul, and spirit. And
yeah.
so there's not space for leisure time to just not do, but just be. That creates a lot of problems.
Yeah, especially with like some people feeling guilt of leisure. Like I saw
Yeah,
something recently, it popped up on my phone. It says you don't need to, ask permission to rest. And I was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
I'm
exactly.
like, but what am I not doing if I'm resting? And I'm like, so my immediate mind is like thinking of all the things why I shouldn't be resting. And then, I do sometimes I'll sit down and I'll lay down and it's maybe like doze off or maybe not, but like that whole experience is just like something that I don't like. For example, I don't think in the Native American times, for example, like when they'd go out hunting and gathering, they'd come home, it was more leisurely, I think.
Oh,
And
can you talk a bit about that? I don't know what the factoid was, and I didn't even fact check it or anything, but I saw something. It might have been about native tribes in Africa, in the savannah or something. They spent something like only 20 to 30% of their time hunting and gathering food and doing domestic chores and stuff like that.
well, it show
They
it
had
it it
tons of leisure time.
it
So
shows how efficient we can be when we put our minds
yeah,
to something, but it also
yeah.
speaks to the fact that yeah, like we don't yeah, this leisure part is a huge part that I think we're missing from like the pastimes that we
Yeah, and that's a lot of what's going on right now is people are getting burnt out from you know being like a dog chasing its tail, and now, like I said, with the inflation and the economic crisis we're going through, so many Americans are like, God, they're just burnt out from just making ends meet and just trying to pay the bills and survive, and so everybody's asking, well, what the hell is this all about? Why are we living like this? This isn't the purpose that we're put on this planet. This isn't. It doesn't feel right. This
right.
doesn't feel natural. What are we doing as a society and as human beings living in the system? It just is total complete madness, and
Well,
that's what precipitates chasing drugs and turning to addiction and stuff like that, because then you don't have to think about stuff like that.
yeah, exactly. And it speaks to how effective drugs are. It also speaks to how much of a problem they can be in when we're trying to build connection and community and society, really.
Yeah. Yeah,
Actually,
to go up even another level, it would be wise for people to ask questions about how and why do so many of these drugs flood into the United States? Like I said, I live in Mexico. A lot of them come from Mexico. Uh, and it's a well-known fact that the United States is the number one consumer of recreational drugs in the world.
yeah.
But then it would maybe not be the case if they weren't all flooding into the United States. And so, why is that? And the main reason why is there's some very, very rich, powerful people that are making a lot of money from the drug business because it's one of the biggest businesses in the world that makes the most money. Drugs, pharmaceuticals, and the military industrial complex. So I don't think all the drugs flooding into the United States are
Are hitting
um,
poor economic. Yeah,
well,
exactly.
I should say, I think a lot of them are being allowed to flood into the United States.
Right.
It's kind of like what happened in LA in the 80s when it was revealed that the CIA was selling and distributing crack cocaine throughout LA.
Yeah,
These
yeah,
things
yeah.
aren't done by accident, they're done with intention.
Yeah, when a couple of years ago when I was after I had my, plant medicine experience, my awakening, I say, and then I went back to using drugs, I realized there's something, and it's part of the matrix, right? The experience of like living. It's like there's something going on here. There's some like major players like in, even in Vermont where I'm from that are like flooding this community with substances. And it's like it's then I'm like shit, like I'm having this paranoid like experience of like, well, how do I get out of it? Like it's just this depth despair of like, but anyways, I think we should maybe stop this one for now and maybe pick that up if we want to do another
Sure.
one, because that is a huge topic that I feel like it would take a long time to kind of get into, but I love your perspective, and I think
Yeah, that would
people
be a,
could learn a
a
lot
great
from you.
subject for next time because, like really quick, like I said, doing the review of your book, I've always lived into, New England once, New Hampshire and Vermont, whatnot. And years ago, I never would have thought that there'd be, fentanyl, heroin, whatever up there. It's the land of, like, what do they say in the review? Kind of like Ben and Jerry's and maple syrup and craft beer. So what happened, in the last couple of decades, and all of a sudden it's been flooded with drugs. It doesn't seem like
Yeah,
it's
this
very
is
natural.
this is something I think there's not even just drugs, but there's also like just these people in politics. There's so much we could get into, and I'd love to. I think that's like huge. But yeah, it's Vermont's such a small state, and yet the amount like per capita, I think it maybe has more drugs than any other state per capita. That's because we have such small amount of people, but
Yeah,
so many drugs. Just you know, not maybe not quantity wise, but per capita. So
yeah,
yeah, let's pick this up again. I'm excited. I'm glad that we had this conversation. You have such a like unique perspective, and it may not even be unique. It's just needed, you know?
yeah, and it's different. And I think one of the things that that helps that is I love to travel, and I've lived outside of the states now 2 different times, and so I mean that changes everything. Once your perspective changes like that, and you see how other people live in other countries, live, and how other countries work to live instead of live to work. It's hard to go back, and most Americans don't have that experience, so it's tough for them to understand that there's better ways of living and doing things. But it's hard, yeah, it's hard to see that if you haven't left the country.
Absolutely. It's like you can't really get the experience without having the experience.
Yeah, which on a final note, I think that's a kind of a big irony. Maybe we could talk about this in the future. Is that a lot of the recreational drugs are flowing into the United States from Mexico, and yet at the same time, substance people suffering from substance use disorder are going to Mexico to heal from
Yeah.
addiction, and then going back to the United States, totally changed and a new person. So that's something interesting to think about too.
I'd love to talk about that because when I was in Puerto Morelos, where I got my Ibogaine experience, I mean, there's a lot of it's hard to be like it. I want to talk about that next time because there's literally
Yeah.
experiences I had down there that were scaring the hell out of me. Um, but at the same time, it's like I'm here for like the most soul transformative experience that's going to save my life, literally save my
Yeah.
life. So it is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks. This was boring. I'd love to talk again sometime soon.
Yeah. Thank you for meeting with me. And
Yep.
I'm gonna end this. Wait, end the recording real quick.